Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. And a very warm welcome to Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. Smash the like button if you love me. Subscribe if you're new. Please have your say. Let's get down to it because today I want to discuss Henry Cavill's Superman and to say that he was never a darker, murderous Superman. And really, he's not that more different as Superman in the costume than Christopher Reeve was. But there was this perception of Henry being a darker Superman. But why? A badder Superman? I never understood it, right? There are differences, right? Because with every new interpretation of something iconic, you're always going to get pushback. When George Michael first came onto the scene, he's no Elvis Presley. No, he isn't. He was George Michael. He was a one-off. He was brilliant. You know, when Whitney Houston came on the scene, she's no Shirley Bassey. No, she could only be Whitney Houston, but just as iconic. That's the thing. So when there's a new version of something iconic, as I say, there's pushback. And there was lots of pushback on Henry Cavill. First of all, when he was cast and everyone found out he was British, Americans didn't like this, which was the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. He's an actor who's going to put on an American accent. What difference is it if he's an American actor or a British actor? We're not talking about a blatant look problem, right? The guy looks like Clark Kent. The guy looks like Superman. But I want to compare Henry Cavill's Superman to Christopher Reeve's Superman and say they're really not that different. Now, yes, the costume is different, but their behaviour while they're in the costume, their motivations while they're in the costumes are pretty much the same thing. Henry Cavill's Superman doesn't put on the Superman costume and say, ooh, I'm a darker, broodier, moodier, badder, darker, murderous Superman. No, his intentions, he only puts on the costume because he's got no choice, because basically, you know, he likes what Jor-El says to him. He has a choice, but, you know, obviously Zod's arrived and he's invading the Earth as well. So he has to be called into action. But when he puts the costume on, he decides to put the costume on. Just like Christopher Reeve's Superman. Their motivations and their histories are not that different. You know, like in Man of Steel, Jonathan Kent doesn't die of a heart attack. You know, now in Smallville, Jonathan Kent does die of a heart attack. And in Superman the movie, he does die of a heart attack. But let's look at the differences. I mean, they're very similar. So Christopher Reeve's Superman feels guilty because he couldn't save his father from having a heart attack. All those things I could do, and I couldn't even save him. Clark in Smallville feels bad because he chose to save the life of Lana Lang, which meant somebody else had to die instead of her. That ended up being Jonathan Kent. So he's guilty. And in Man of Steel, we have that brilliant tornado sequence. And anyone who doesn't like that tornado sequence or says it doesn't make sense is because you don't want it to make sense. You wanted to hate the new version of Superman. It's every dog owner would have gone back to that car to save that dog. Fact. Maybe they could have found another way, another reason for him to go back to the car. But at the end of the day, for me, it's absolutely fine. But basically, Clark feels guilty because he trusts his father. And basically, he has the abilities to save his father. But his father says no, because he doesn't want him to expose himself yet as an alien, as a superpowered alien. So Clark's always going to feel bad that he listened to his father. So there's a, you know, there's a theme, there's a connective theme with all these versions of Superman, guilt towards their father's death. And this is one of the reasons, this is one of the things that drives all these versions of Superman. That's why it's so compelling and so interesting, because I think there's not one person that maybe, I know I feel this way, that doesn't feel guilt for the passing of their parents. Maybe not necessarily because of the circumstances of the passing, but you argue with your parents, you sometimes disrespect your parents, you don't obey their wishes. It's my life, I do what I want. So you've always got that guilt. So that's a very relatable thing. And so I don't see that bigger difference between Henry Cavill's Superman and Christopher Reeve's Superman. Now, the differences are the way they portrayed Clark Kent. Chris plays a very dopey, clumsy Clark Kent. That's the disguise. Now, Henry Cavill's Clark Kent is very handsome, upstanding, but he sits in a corner and doesn't make much noise, but he stands by his principles, especially in BVS, when Perry White doesn't want him to go after, Batman, basically using the newspaper to write articles about Batman's, brutal torture of villains. But he's still being a journalist and he's being Clark Kent. He's not acting like Superman. You wouldn't guess that guy's Superman. Well, I wouldn't, because normally normal people don't get a close look of Superman. That's why the disguise is perfect. And when people say it's a bad disguise, it's only a bad disguise if Superman allows people to get too close physically to his vicinity. But they've covered that in a Man of Steel because Lois Lane already knows that Clark Kent is Superman. And she's really one of the few people who ever gets close to him in the movie. It's a very clever thing to do to kind of disperse the myth that the glasses disguise is a bad disguise. Personally, I think it's a genius disguise. He acts meek, mild, and he puts glasses on, right? And unless you're an audience member who already knows who he is, you wouldn't know who he was. Basically, that's how I feel about it anyway. So that's where the differences are. Now, there's no question that Man of Steel is a more aggressively explosive, action-packed, violent movie. And clearly, Superman the movie is a more graceful movie. Dick Donner wanted to be very faithful to, the source material in every single way. He wanted to make it bright, light. It's funny when you're with Clark Kent, but there's also some very dark moments in Superman the movie. When Lois Lane dies and Superman screams to the heavens. And as a viewer for the first time, you actually believe she's dead. You don't know what he's going to do. And so there are dark moments in Superman the movie. There are interesting moments, dramatic moments and beats in Superman the movie. There is action in the movie. But because, technically they weren't able to do certain things, it had to be more of a disaster movie. He couldn't fight a Zod in Superman the movie. Now, their techniques improved for Superman 2, and this is why we had the first superhero supervillain battle. Supervillains, should I say. And it looked great for then, and it still looks great now when I look at it. All practical effects, everything, miniatures, beautifully shot. I prefer that technique than CGI. I'm as bored of CGI as most of you are, by the way. But my point is in this video is just to discuss how I don't see defined differences between Henry Cavill in the costume and Christopher Reeve in the costume. And then, people say, well, of course he's a darker, murderous Superman. He murdered Zod. He didn't murder Zod. He killed Zod to preserve human life. Basically, Zod was about to burn to a crisp using his heat vision, like a family, like a guy, a woman, and their child. Or was it their 2 kids? I can't remember. So Superman was justified to kill Zod. Basically, Zod gives him no choice, purposely. Now, if you don't like that, you can blame David Goyer and his script. You can't blame Superman, because in the story, Superman has no choice. And I know this was a very controversial thing in the movie, and it cost the movie a lot of money. But ultimately, is it really controversial? Actually, Superman's never been more Superman than when he snapped Zod's neck. Let me explain. Why does he snap Zod's neck? To preserve human life. That's the most Superman thing to do ever. That's why Superman puts on the costume. That's why he puts on the cape. He uses his abilities to protect human life and life around the universe. Sometimes he's gone out to space. He's gone to stay on different planets. He's helped a lot of, people around the cosmos. But mainly he's on Earth. and he's on Earth to protect human life. That's why he kills Zod. He doesn't kill Zod because he wants Zod dead. He absolutely bellows with devastation once he's killed him. That's the script and the director saying to you, he didn't want to do this. He's not a cold-blooded killer. He had no choice. So I never understood what the big deal was. Now, I understand the whole no-kill policy, but what's good about this moment is that once he kills, he knows what it's like to kill. He ain't really going to want to do it willy-nilly. And I mean, you can argue when he's, beating the shit out of Steppenwolf and, putting his heat vision on him, that ultimately he's trying to kill him. And he is. But Steppenwolf is an absolute threat. Now, this is a defined difference between Christopher Reeve's Superman and Henry's Superman. That is a difference. But ultimately, he's a hero. They're both heroes. They're both on Earth for the same reason. They're both the same characters. And, what's very, very dangerous of this perception of Henry Cavill's Superman being a darker, murderous Superman is when you look at the next guy who's about to adapt Superman, who's James Gunn. Because there becomes a misunderstanding and a climate of fear when you're the next creative. Because you can't be as innovative with the character. So you try and stick to what you think people want. So it's very similar to Justice League compared to Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? So the idea was after BVS, give Justice League to Joss. He'll brighten it up. He'll do an Avengers ensemble movie. It'll be great. We'll make $2 billion and everyone will forget about Zack Snyder. That's not how it worked out because Joss was put in an impossible situation. He couldn't create that situation because he was taking somebody else's work and recycling it. How anyone thought they were going to pull it off, I don't know. So ultimately, you get a mess by the time you get the movie in theatres. And what happens is everyone prefers Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's a complete movie. It's a complete vision. It doesn't matter that it's a much darker picture, that the colours are darker and greyer. Jesus Christ, he's even got a version called, Justice is Grey, a black and white version. That might even be my preferred version to the colour version. So good. Zack Snyder is an artist and a filmmaker. When someone like Joss Whedon comes along and tries to change that vision, it doesn't work. Joss Whedon should have made his own Justice League once they drove out Snyder. That was the mistake. And so this is a similar situation to what we've got with James Gunn, him doing Superman Legacy. This is not a guy who feels deeply about Superman. I don't think this is particularly a guy who understands Superman that deep. But what he's been chosen because there's a perception. He's from the MCU, a popular franchise. Guardians 1 and 2 made a lot of money. He knows what he's doing. He talks a good game about DC and Superman. He'll do what Snyder didn't do. He'll bring everyone together. But when there's a misunderstanding about what the audience and Access Media are demanding, there's a problem. Because once you try and copy and paste the comics or what Dick Donner did, which was wonderful and beautiful. I grew up on Dick Donner's Superman the movie. And, Dick Lester's Superman 2. I love those movies. But they're in the past. When George Michael comes along, I don't want Elvis Presley. I want George Michael because I'm a young man. I don't want Elvis, I want George. That's where I am, right? So I've got Christopher Reeve's movies in my collection. I can watch them whenever I want, and I do often. But I don't want that Superman. That Superman's been done. I want a modern day Superman that ticks the boxes of me and the youth of today. That's what you want. That's what you want. Now, obviously, we can argue the box office didn't necessarily bring everyone to the plate. Like, Mario's clearly relatable with a lot of people, right? Because the movie's about to make $1 billion. There was something, but basically, a Superman movie to make over $1 billion, right, has to be attracted to children and families. And when you've got Superman snapping someone's neck, I understand it's not going to make the money like a Mario movie is going to make because you've driven that target audience away. Do you understand? So that I don't know if that look if you're looking if Man of Steel was a business move, then it didn't work out. But in terms of two writers in Nolan and Goya and the director's vision in Snyder's vision, artistic vision, it works. The vision works of it for a certain audience, right? For a cult audience, it works as BVS does, as the Snyder Cut does. So in terms of the Snyderverse isn't good business, but it's good artistic, art house filmmaking. So there's a difference. Do you want to be Disney? Do you want to be the MCU? Or do you want to deliver art to a cult audience? That's the decision you have to make. But James Gunn could absolutely misunderstand this entire situation and give us a Superman that maybe doesn't work because he's too light, he's too unrealistic, his reactions are too perfect. Do you understand? There has to be flaws. Even Superman has to have flaws. One of the most, I think Tom Welling's Clark Kent may be the most popular, rightly well done version of the character done ever. Why? Because we meet him as a teenager. And you're never more flawed as a person than when you're a teenager, right? You make mistakes because your mind is developing, your behavior is developing. So Clark makes mistakes. And that's why Tom's Clark Kent is probably more relatable than any other version of live action Superman. And I know that's a controversial thing to say because he's flawed. We see it in season 1, his insistence to play football. His father's right, you shouldn't be playing football. Someone could see you do something. You could hurt someone like he does in season 4, right? Clark wants to have the ordinary life of an ordinary human teenager, but he can't, and he only finds that out when he becomes a 30-year-old man, where he has to keep his identity a secret. And it's his father who teaches him this. So this is why it's important in any interpretation that Superman has flaws. So in Man of Steel, Henry's Superman is extremely flawed in the way that he's never been Superman before. He's never done this before. He's grown up, he's explored the world, he's tried to discover his origins, but he's never known a situation like this. This is a fucking alien invasion, from his own planet. Right? And he's never done the hero thing before. It's like when he sees his mother being threatened by Zod. You think you can threaten my mother? He's angry. He crashes into the petrol station without thinking about all the collateral damage. Because that's the whole idea of the film. It's Superman Begins. He's not the perfect Superman. Now, you people who hated Snyder, Goyer and Nolan for this misunderstood. Because the whole point is, he's making mistakes and doing the wrong things because he's never done this before. That's much more relatable than a perfect Superman that on his first day does everything perfectly, right? Because, let me explain something to you. This is something else people don't understand. In Superman the movie, Christopher Reeve's Kal-El is trained by Marlon Brando's Jor-El for what? 10, 15 years, whatever it is. You see he's going, he's educating him about space and everything. He's getting his training. Henry Cavill's Superman in Man of Steel doesn't get that training. All he gets is a little lecture from his father. His father shows him the costume. He puts the costume on. That's it. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what the right thing to do is. So he continues being Clark Kent instead of Kal-El, the last son of Krypton. So this is why there's lots of destruction because he's not got the experience to stop that destruction. And also, there's the reality. If you're fighting a villain, things are going to blow up around you and there's nothing you can do about it. So this is what what Zack was trying to do and what Goyer and Nolan were trying to do. Say the reality is, Superman can't save everyone. That's the point. So, as I say, this is a more modern day version. But I still attest that there's not much difference in terms of motivations to, Chris's Superman and Henry's Superman. And as I say, what happens is you get this situation where now everyone thinks, oh, I want a cartoony Superman. I want a Christopher Reeve Superman. And as I say, times move on. And if you want the Christopher Reeve Superman, just watch his movies. That's what I say. I love them. I think both versions, in terms of Henry and Chris, are both valid. There's lots of people out there who will put down Chris's version to try and make Henry's version look superior, or the other way round. I don't do that because I love both versions. I genuinely think Snyder got Superman right for a modern day cult audience. And, Dick Donner got Superman right for a mainstream general audience. The money Superman the movies made through the years is outstanding, and a lot more money than Man of Steel has ever made. If you translate the money, from 1978's money to today's money, it's obvious it's made more money. There's no debate there. But it's not just about money. So you have to have a modern take. What you have to do, it's a difficult balance with iconic characters. It's a bit like James Bond. How do you make James Bond? He's more difficult than Superman because he's a sexist, he's a misogynist, he does drink, he does smoke. A lot of things that are unacceptable today. But that's who he is. And I think once you accept who he is, you can have a lot of fun with him. Like, people around him can nod their heads and disapprove of him, but that's who he is. Doesn't make him a bad person. Bond's still a hero. He's just a flawed hero. Like Jack Bauer, right? I prefer flawed heroes. So there's no rule anywhere saying that Superman can't be a little bit more flawed. As Henry Cavill's Superman is much more flawed than Christopher Reeve's Superman. Tom Welling's Clark Kent is a lot more flawed than Christopher Reeve's Superman and Clark Kent. Because we were more in a new modern time where people expect that. Whether you were in 2001 when Smallville premiered, or it was 2013 when Man of Steel, was released in movie theatres. The point is, in these modern times, we want more flaws in our characters. No, I don't want an evil, murderous Superman. And at the end of the day, that's not what Henry Cavill's Superman is. Now, in the nightmare future, he's literally pretty much the Injustice Superman, and he's under Darkseid's control. So it's different. He's not purposely being a murderous, brutal, dark Superman. It's just that he's under someone's control, right? But when he's at his peak as Superman, whether it's Man of Steel or BVS, and he's doing the right thing and he wants to be a hero, he's basically the Superman you've known and loved all that time. That's the point I'm making. But what happens is, and this is the damage that's been done to DC, because people misunderstood the Snyderverse, because people misunderstood what Zack was doing with Superman, there's going to be a misunderstanding in the new, interpretation of Superman and DC. Everything has to be bright and funny. You've seen how James works, right? We spoke about this the other day. He'll take a really deep, serious moment, like we saw in the first clip of Guardians of the Galaxy. But there's a greater example, which we've discussed on here before, when Bloodsport and Harley are talking about Rick Flag. He was my friend. He was my friend too. It's a very sad moment. Then they crack a joke to lighten the mood. Now, it's because some people feel uncomfortable in serious moments, and clearly James feels you've got to break the tension quickly. When he breaks the tension like that, he takes something away from that moment, and he doesn't realize it because he keeps on doing the same thing again, and again. Keeps on doing it. He's not learning. He's not looking at that and seeing that as a problem. And the more I think about this, and I know I've been going on about it, and I'm sorry if I bore you by repeating myself, but I think these issues are very important. When I think about Superman, a Superman movie, doing that kind of thing, like having a serious moment, then breaking it with humour, I think people are not going to like it. It is a problem. You've got to be adult and mature enough as a human being, as a creative, as a writer-director, and say it's okay to have a sad moment. Let people cry, right? Let me give you a fine example. I'm a bit obsessed with 24 and Jack Bauer right now. It's probably unhealthy, right? So we get that moment at the end of day 3. Jack's in the car. He starts crying, right? Basically, he's breaking down from the past 2 days where his wife was murdered, and we had day 2, and all the losses he suffered, and he's literally just had to, get an axe and cut Chase's hand off because there was a bomb chained to him, right? And so he breaks down and cries. So just imagine, right? All of a sudden, after he starts crying, someone walks up to him and goes, "All right, Jack, how's it going?" and cracks a joke. Imagine that being changed like that from the ending, that gripping ending, because when he cries, I'm crying with him. Anyone who's ever seen that moment, who knows what I'm talking about, who knows this character, this fabulous character that's been, molded by this genius of an actor, Kiefer Sutherland. Yeah, imagine if they used the gag just as he's crying. Doesn't work, does it? And this is what I'm saying to you. What happened is the Snyderverse was misunderstood so deeply. Snyder was doing something interesting and deep with great imagery, artistic imagery, right? It was revolutionary. And the more I think about it, the more I love it. The more I watch the Snyderverse, the more I love it. And the more I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for James Gunn. I think James Gunn probably thinks, I'll just copy and paste the comics. I'll be very, very faithful with the suit. I'll put the red trunks on him. I'll have a few gags. It'll be fine. There won't be much to my story, but it'll be fine. This is why I think he's totally the wrong person to make a Superman movie. I think he's a good guy to do Suicide Squad, Peacemaker. I don't think he's the right guy to run DC. A lot of people do. A lot of people disagree with me, and that's fine. I didn't form this channel to create a dictatorship. I love disagreement as long as it's done constructively and politely and respectfully, right? And the point is, I'm very frightened because I like what Zack Snyder did, but I like what Dick Donner did. I like both versions. I think they both work for the times they were made in. But no, Henry Cavill's Superman was never a darker, murderous Superman. He was a valid, contemporary Superman. Christopher Reeve's Superman was, a valid, contemporary Superman for that time. Jesus Christ, where would Superman be now without Christopher Reeve? But where would Superman be from 2001 to 2010 without Smallville? Smallville created the new generation of Superman fans. And Henry Cavill's Superman brought people into that fandom who would never have been Superman fans without that version. So they're all valid, they all matter. But life and generations change. Iconic characters change. When we're gone in 1,000 years' time, there'll be different versions of Superman. God knows what we would have thought of them, but we won't be around to care. So it won't really matter. So it's very important when you're doing a new iteration of an iconic character, you do it for the right reasons. So clearly, this studio now wants to make a lot of money. So I understand they're going to try and be as faithful with the material as possible. But I also think you need to be original with Superman. So the important thing is not to change. For me, if I was writing and directing a Superman movie, I'm thinking, right, this is Superman. He has to be pure. He has to be good. But that doesn't mean he can't be funny. It doesn't mean he can't be flawed. It doesn't mean he can't make mistakes. I've mentioned this gag before. I wrote down in my own Superman story, right? When we got Manchester Black and Metallo. I've told you that story before. And someone tries to shoot Superman and Superman goes, "Where have you been? The Phantom Zone?" Because in other words, why don't you know that I'm bulletproof? It's a gag, right? Maybe you think that's a funny gag. Maybe you think that's a shit gag. But there's no reason why Superman can't have one-liners, right? No reason why he can't be flawed. No, but I don't want a perfect Superman that never makes mistakes, right? And even in Superman 2, Christopher Reeve's Superman makes a schoolboy error. He gives up his powers. And basically, look what happens. He's selfish. He gives up his powers for love. I don't blame him, but he makes a mistake. That shows you that the Christopher Reeve version of Superman wasn't perfect either. And that's a good thing. You don't want perfect, unflawed heroes. And this is the accusation that's been made against Superman at times, that he's too perfect. I think if you read the comics, you'll see where he's flawed. I think if you read certain versions of the graphic novels, you'll see sometimes that he's a flawed character. But it's important to make him flawed, but not bad and not evil, of course. But when he's wearing the suit, he's got to be a pure guy and his heart's got to be in the right place. Well-mannered, but that doesn't mean he has to be boring, as I say. And what frightens me about this new interpretation that they've seen all the flack that Zack got, and I think maybe they're going to be too scared. James Gunn's going to be too afraid to do something original. One thing I can say about Zack Snyder's version of DC and Superman, it's damn original, and because of that, it's damn beautiful. This has been Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wife. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. Smash the like button if you love me. Subscribe if you're new. Please have your say. And until I see you again, have a lovely day, and I will be back, same place, same back channel, tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.